Hi guys! Today's video is in collaboration with FanastyFinder, an extremely talented doll YouTuber who I've quietly cyberstalked for a while now. She's made all kinds of dolls that I really love the look of, so when she said she'd be available to do a collab, I was super excited. We batted around a few ideas for a topic, but settled on a challenge Fana had done before. We each give each other 3 words and base the doll off of that. The words that I gave her were moonlight, sorry, and ghost. And I think her doll turned out gorgeous. I really love the desaturated color palette and then the bright pops of red. It's so dramatic and lovely. So don't forget to give her video a watch. For my doll, the words Fana gave me were crystal, nightlight, and superhero. Immediately I knew I wanted to make a superhero whose powers were based in magic. Think Starfire or Scarlet Witch over Superman or Batman. As for a nightlight, I thought a really cool way to work that in would be to have the crystals light up. I drew up some quick concept work, and here's where I'm going to subject you to my terrible artwork. I've actually spoken to a lot of customizers about this recently, and it seems like a lot of us doll artists can't draw well on paper for some reason. Anyway, back to the doll. I wanted to make her a little thicker than your average Monster High girl, and have the crystals growing out from her face, which means that the light will have to go in her head as well, so it looks like I'll be cutting this girl's head open. That's a lot of firsts for me. Let's see if I can do this. Starting with the base, I have an idea. I have this operetta who's in good condition, but, well, honestly, I'm just not a fan of her. I personally prefer human skin tones, and this scroll work on her shoulder is interesting, but a little limiting. You have to work it into the design somehow, and I just find that difficult. For the head, I'm going to use this Claudine head. For me, it's a real toss-up between Draculara and Claudine as to which is my favorite face mold. I've customized a few Claudines now, and I really just love the way her face looks. I start by chopping off the hair as close to the root as I can get. I would have tried to save this hair, but it's pretty gluey at the root and very tangled, so that's too bad. This part is business as usual. Cut the hair and use a pair of pliers to scrape glue out of the inside of the head. Then yank out all those glue chunks. Once that's finished, I cut off her ears. I never seem to use the ears that come on Claudine. Maybe I'm just not that into werewolves. Once those are gone, I cut open a good-sized hole in the back of her head. I wanted enough access to get into her head easily, but also leave it small enough that I can hopefully cover it up with hair. Then finally, I wipe the factory face with pure acetone. For the crystal part of this challenge, I'm going to use these 3 crystal points I got from Michaels. I take 3 of the smallest points and fiddle them around trying to figure out what arrangement is the best for them. I wish they were a little smaller, but I tried to hammer them apart and that did nothing. So what can you do? Once I'm happy with how they look, I glue them first to each other with a dab of hot glue. Then make a big cap of glue on the bottom so they won't ever come apart. I really like how the hot glue looks. It's like they're really coming out of their own little geode. Plus, it's clear so the light can pass through it. I trace around the edge of the crystals on a napkin, staying as close and tight as I possibly can. Once you cut this shape out, it will become the stencil to cut open your doll head, so err on the side of being too small rather than too big. You can always cut more. Use the stencil to make sure your crystals will fit through. Once you're confident in the shape, carefully cut out the shape onto your doll's face. Make sure you like the position, it's not going to be movable from here after. Similar to inset eyes, you're going to need to thin out the vinyl around the cut. Yeah, I think that looks pretty cool. And it lights up super well. Let's switch to the body mods for now. I'm going to use a 2-part epoxy to bulk her up a bit. Take equal parts of A and B and mush them together. I know y'all keep seeing me mix this stuff with no gloves on, and yes, I know the stuff is toxic, but what can I say? I like to live on the edge. I apparently started with her behind, and the way that I went about this was to make a sort of sheet of epoxy and then stick it to the part of the doll I wanted thicker. I don't think this is a great method. I lost a lot of the sculpting that Monster High artists put into their dolls, and I've never sculpted anything before, so I was very much going into this blind. I eventually tugged that bit off the butt and tried again. I wrapped some sheets of epoxy around her thighs to try and thicken them up. And I do find it kind of funny that as much material as I put on her legs, I still couldn't close that thigh gap. Monster High proportions are so extremely exaggerated to be cartoony. I also bulked up on her bust and hips, putting on globs of epoxy and smoothing it out with a wet finger. This is when I tried to fill in the scroll work on her shoulder, but it all just popped off during the sanding process, so I gave up on that pretty quickly. I did 2 passes with the epoxy on this doll. The first time I was holding back quite a bit, afraid of making her look weird, since this was my first time doing a body sculpting. I showed the pictures to some of my friends on Discord, and everyone agreed that I should try and push the proportions a little more. So I came back in and added more to the bust and hips, and even a little around her ribcage. I wanted to leave her waist alone to create that exaggerated wasp waist you see on superheroines. Once I was finally happy with her, she got a thorough sanding, although not as thorough as I probably should have. My manicure sanding blocks are super cheap, and they've actually been used a few times before. They sort of just disintegrated, and I couldn't tell if the mods were flush or not, so she came out a little lumpy after I airbrushed her. For my first time, I'm not too mad at the sculpting. I think it looks really nice, and she is a little thicker than a regular Monster High doll. It was super tempting to go and airbrush her as soon as she was finished being sanded, but I forced myself to wait and make the clothes first. That way I could handle her without being worried about the paint chipping off. I want to show a lot of skin since I think that the crystal powers might work by absorbing light from the sun first. With that in mind, I found this swimsuit pattern that I made a few months ago. Using it as a jumping off point, I finagled the pattern around until I had this. It's got a deep V in the back to show off a tattoo that I'm going to draw on her back. I wanted something dark and mysterious for her suit, and I found this material. This is a 4-way stretch fabric with a beautiful iridescent shimmer on top that shifts from black to purple. It's perfect for a magical superhero, and since it's so stretchy, I didn't have to put clasps or closures or anything on the back. Once the pattern piece is cut out, I glue down the hems. I didn't need to do this since the material won't fray, but it does make the edges look more finished, and it hides the thin white line that you get on the back of this material. The sleeves are a little different this time. Since I wanted them to be open on the top, I cut the pattern out backwards, with the armpit being the solid part and the top of the shoulder being the open part. If you're replicating this, just fold the sleeve pattern in half and trace out the two pieces with a dip in the middle. She needs something else. Maybe a cape? Or how about a cloak? I think I have a pattern piece for a hood too. Hem your cloak with more glue. I just sort of eyeballed this pattern piece. It's maybe a little smaller than I should have made it, but I still think it came out looking cool. And sew up the hood for good measure. For clothes, I'm gonna go with thigh-high boots. I start off with a basic sock pattern and extend it on the top so that it'll close up around her thigh, then sew it all shut. Using clay, I mold on a wedge-shaped heel, and honestly I just baked this in the oven with the fabric. It was fine, nothing caught on fire. Actually, I don't like this. The white is a little too stark, and my sculpting skills have a lot to be desired. Let's try again. Off camera, I made this heel shape out of epoxy, and used a crystal point for the heel. Next, I carefully cut open the bottom of the boot and pull out all those threads. Turn the fabric right side out and slide the heel shape in. Then, using a ladder stitch, I close the boot back up along the shape of the heel, leaving a hole for the crystal point to poke out of. I'm actually really happy with how these boots came out. The last thing I need for her outfit is the little gems on the joins of her sleeve. I used the leftover epoxy I had sitting around, and using the back of an eraser, poke a slight bevel into the circle. I made 7 in total, though I'm only showing the sleeve gems here. I coat them first with silver paint. Eventually they were completely silver. Then I paint the jewel part a light crystal blue. And they're so small and light they keep getting pushed out of place by my paintbrush. Now to solidify the Nightlight part of this challenge, I got some cool glow-in-the-dark paint. I coat the blue parts liberally with the glow-in-the-dark paint, going over in about 3 or 4 thick coats, since the directions said to lay it on pretty thick. Once they're good and dry, I carefully squeeze out a tiny drop of UV resin onto each gem. Since they're concave, the drop of the resin sits on top of the blue gem, and the silver rim on the outside looks like a setting for that gem. I set these on the windowsill to cure. They came out really cute, just the way I wanted them to. And they glow really nicely too. Now that all the clothes are finished, I can finally paint her. I'm still using the set of paints that came with my airbrush kit, so I mix all my prime colors together to get a brown, then shift things around from there. I wanted a really deep, rich color for this doll's skin, and I spent quite a bit of time messing around with the mix, but apparently I just made raw umber. I probably could have saved some time and just watered down some of the raw umber acrylic I already have, but I guess the practice was good. I'm working with a pretty big color difference here, so she took maybe 4 or 5 coats to become completely covered. I'm so happy with how she came out though. The color is super rich and beautiful. I sealed her a few times with matte varnish, but she came out a little too shiny, so I hit her with a few layers of MSC to make her matte again. Off camera, I rooted her in white and made this little contraption. It's a loop of wire attached to the inside of her scalp with epoxy. Sitting inside is a magnet. It will link up with this other magnet that I'm going to glue into the inside of her head. Using a spot of super glue, I coat the back of the magnet, then wow, there's a lot of hair in here. Just put it in. Phew! Not sure why I found that so nerve-wracking. Great, now her head closes. Mostly. This isn't the cleanest job, but I'll just cover it with hair. Shh, no one has to know. I'm going to reattach her head now. That way if the paint chips on her neck, I can go out and touch it up before the face-up is finished. It's not trying to fit. Just go ahead and cut off that extra bit of neck peg. There we go, much easier. Now she can finally get a face. Wow, this video already feels super long. There was a lot of lead up to this moment. Since her skin tone is so dark, I'm not going to be able to contour her much. I'll mostly have to use lighter colors to give some dimension and life to the skin. Although I did mix up one contour color by mixing raw umber and purple and even a little bit of black. One of the beautiful features of dark skin is how reflective it is, and how it can pick up on other colors, so I'm going to be using purples for the highlight. I've even got some purple micro glitter for a shimmery, dramatic highlight. I start with the contour, hitting right under her cheekbones and along the jaw. But I switch over to the blush color pretty early on. Then I come in with the purple micro glitter for that highlight I'm so excited about. When using micro glitter in a face-up, it's better to use it on each layer of MSC, since the MSC will mattify it and leach a lot of the shine out. The more layers you add, the more of a shine you'll see in the end. Next, I sketch in the shapes of the eyes with my darkest brown. I can just barely see it. Let's take a moment to marvel at my General's chalk pencil. Normally, I think I would have just had to paint on her eye whites with acrylics, but this pencil fills in her sclera in just a few passes. I darken up her lash line as much as I can, drawing the lashes on halfway down the sculpt of her eye. I wanted her to look like she wasn't really seeing with her eyes anymore, but with her mind and her powers. She's got a bit of a backstory, but I'll talk about that during the photo shoot. For now, I come back in with the gray pencil and outline the shape of the iris, keeping the colors light and blended. At first, I did black eyebrows, mostly because I really love how dark eyebrows look with light-colored hair, but they just don't show up on this doll. I filled them in with pencils, then chalk, and finally paint trying to build up the color, but it just didn't come out good. For now, I'll switch to the tattoo on her back. I sketch out the shape that I want in a similar color, and I'm just making this design up as I go. Then I come back in with acrylic in the same color as the gems on her clothes, and fill in the color. Finally, I blot on a few thick layers of glow-in-the-dark paint. It's very see-through in the daylight, so I wasn't worried about it being too thick. Finally, I gloss her eyes and lips, and her face is finished. I did come back in off camera and give her white brows, and I think she looks much more balanced now. What do you think? Her name is Haleh, and for a superhero name, I think Chrysalis fits her really well. Shout out to my friend Todd Howard on Discord for coming up with that one. Her story is she comes from another planet, powered by a great crystal. Haleh was training to become a priestess of that crystal when the planet was attacked. She summoned all the magic inside her to protect her home and loved ones, but it came at a price. The crystal started to take her over, infect her, growing out of her body and turning her hair shock white. It was only the desperate pleas of her lover Neela that brought her back, but forever marked by the crystal's powers. I don't usually come up with backstories for my dolls, but this challenge really inspired me. I know Fana had a lot of fun with this project too, so don't forget to give her video a watch. I really love Haleh. I think she's some of my best work yet. If you liked this video, give that like button a click, and don't forget to subscribe for more doll content. I put out a new video every other week. You can follow me on Instagram for more behind the scenes stuff and sneak peeks, and Haleh here is up for sale on my Etsy. Thank you so much for watching!